step into the dark world of British Columbia's most chilling true crime cases. In this compilation, we explore 6 unsolved murders, cold cases, and notorious criminal acts that have haunted the province for decades. From Vancouver's mysterious disappearances to the shocking Surrey Six Massacre, each story reveals the investigation, the unanswered questions, and the eerie legacy left behind. Prepare for a gripping journey through the darkest corners of BC true crime. If you have any criminal cases that you want us to cover in the future, please comment them down below. In the summer of 1994, Nick and Lisa Masée appeared to be living a life most people could only imagine. They were well known in Vancouver's social circles, regularly seen at upscale restaurants and exclusive events. Friends described them as confident, outgoing, and deeply connected to the city's business elite. Nothing about their public image suggested that, within days, they would vanish without a trace and become part of one of Canada's most unsettling unsolved disappearances. Nick Masée was in his mid-50s and had spent decades working as a private banker with the Bank of Montreal. Over a career lasting more than 3 decades, he managed money for wealthy and powerful clients, involved in mining, stocks, and speculative investments. Through this work, Nick gained access to influential figures tied to the Vancouver Stock Exchange, a place that, during that era, had a reputation for risky deals and questionable companies. His position gave him credibility, but it also placed him close to people operating in a high-pressure and sometimes dangerous financial world. Lisa Masée was much younger than her husband and worked as a professional hairdresser. She was known for her strong work ethic and her lively personality. While Nick handled finances and business relationships, Lisa maintained her own career and social connections. Together, they projected success and stability, hosting dinners, traveling, and maintaining relationships with some of the city's most well-connected individuals. Behind closed doors, however, their situation was far more fragile. Despite Nick's long banking career, his income did not match the lifestyle they were trying to maintain. Their North Vancouver home was heavily mortgaged, and the couple carried significant personal debt. Credit card balances had grown steadily, and financial pressure was becoming harder to ignore. Lisa continued working full-time, not as a hobby, but out of necessity. Nick had recently stepped away from traditional banking and moved into the world of speculative business. He accepted a role connected to a technology company called Turbodyne Technologies, which was linked to the Vancouver Stock Exchange. This shift was a gamble. If it succeeded, it could solve their financial problems. If it failed, the consequences could be severe. Those close to the couple later said Nick seemed focused on making one final deal that would change everything. As August of 1994 approached, there was no sign that Nick and Lisa were planning to leave their lives behind. Their home remained fully furnished. Their personal routines continued, appointments were scheduled, and responsibilities remained in place. To anyone watching from the outside, they were still firmly rooted in Vancouver. What no one realized at the time was that the pressure building beneath the surface was about to collide with events that would erase them from their own lives. The stage was set for a disappearance that would leave behind unanswered questions, conflicting theories, and a mystery that continues to haunt investigators decades later. By early August of 1994, Nick Masée was focused on what he believed could be the deal that saved everything. He told associates he was expecting a major investment connected to Turbodyne Technologies, one that could bring in millions of dollars and finally relieve the financial strain he and Lisa were under. A dinner meeting was scheduled in downtown Vancouver for the evening of August 10th. According to people familiar with the plan, the meeting involved a wealthy investor and was important enough that transportation arrangements had been discussed in advance. That evening, Nick and Lisa never arrived at the restaurant. No one received a call explaining the absence. The reservation was simply missed. For people who knew Nick, this was unusual. He was described as careful and organized, especially when business was involved. Still, one missed dinner did not immediately raise alarm. The following morning, August 11th, activity linked to the couple briefly surfaced. Using Nick's mobile phone, Lisa made phone calls to her workplace and to a business associate connected to Nick. In both conversations, she calmly explained that they would be away for a few days. There was no obvious panic in her voice, and nothing in her words suggested danger. Phone records later showed the calls were routed through cell towers serving the North Shore area. After those calls, all communication stopped. Days passed with no further contact. Lisa did not return to work. Nick failed to appear for business obligations. Concern grew among family members, and eventually, Lisa's sister went to the couple's North Vancouver home to check on them. What she found immediately felt wrong. The house was quiet. The front door was closed but unlocked. The security alarm, which the couple normally used, had been turned off. Their vehicle was still parked outside. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle. Personal items remained where they should have been. Passports, wallets, and identification had not been taken. Their elderly cat was still inside the home, unattended. Near the entrance, investigators later noted 2 plastic zip ties lying on the floor. These ties were not part of the household and had no obvious innocent explanation. Despite this, nothing else appeared disturbed. There were no broken objects, no blood, and no indication of forced entry. When police became involved, the case was immediately classified as suspicious. The scene did not fit a typical robbery or a sudden voluntary trip. At the same time, it did not clearly point to violence. The unanswered questions multiplied quickly. Why leave behind identification and money? Why disable the alarm? And why would Lisa calmly make calls if something terrible had already happened? As investigators began documenting timelines and collecting records, it became clear that the brief window between the missed dinner and those final phone calls would be critical. Whatever happened to Nick and Lisa Masée unfolded quietly, efficiently, and without witnesses. The trail, already thin, was growing colder by the hour. As the days turned into weeks, investigators shifted their focus away from the house and toward Nick Masée's business and financial life. Police began carefully reviewing bank records, credit accounts, and investment activity, looking for any sign that the disappearance had been planned in advance or forced by outside pressure. What they uncovered painted a far more complicated picture of the couple's situation than their public image suggested. Despite moving in wealthy circles, Nick's personal finances were strained. Investigators confirmed that the Masees were carrying significant debt, including large balances on multiple credit cards and heavy obligations tied to their home. There was no evidence of recent large cash withdrawals that would suggest a planned escape, but police did identify financial activity, showing the couple had been living beyond their steady income for some time. Attention quickly returned to Turbodyne Technologies and Nick's role within the company. Detectives interviewed business associates and examined company records to determine whether Nick had been involved in any disputes, risky deals, or conflicts that could have made him a target. While Turbodyne itself was not proven to be directly involved in criminal activity connected to the disappearance, investigators acknowledged that the broader stock market environment in Vancouver during that period was volatile and at times dangerous. Police also confirmed that Nick and Lisa possessed foreign travel documents and had previously lived outside of Canada. This fact complicated the investigation. It meant the possibility of international travel could not be ruled out, even though there was no confirmed record of them leaving the country. Border crossings, airline manifests, and passport activity were reviewed, but none produced a verified sighting. Search efforts expanded beyond Vancouver. Police canvassed marinas, ferry terminals, and rural properties connected to the couple's social and business circles. Tips began to arrive from the public, ranging from alleged sightings to rumors about secret accounts and hidden investments. Each lead was investigated, but none resulted in confirmed evidence of where Nick and Lisa had gone. By this stage, investigators were facing a growing dilemma. The case contained elements that pointed in opposite directions. Financial stress suggested motive, but the lack of preparation suggested the disappearance may not have been voluntary. The absence of physical evidence limited what police could prove. With no bodies, no crime scene, and no confirmed sightings, the case remained balanced between two unsettling possibilities. As the investigation continued, police began quietly considering broader theories. To move forward, they would need to decide whether they were looking for victims of a crime or people who had chosen to vanish. That decision would shape everything that came next. As the investigation stretched on with no physical evidence and no confirmed sightings, police were forced to openly examine competing theories. By this stage, the case was no longer treated as a routine missing persons file. Investigators formally described it as a disappearance under suspicious circumstances, a classification that allowed them to keep resources assigned while acknowledging the lack of proof for a specific crime. One theory focused on targeted foul play, connected to Nick Masée's professional world. Detectives considered whether someone may have viewed Nick as a liability or a problem that needed to be removed. Interviews with people in his business circle revealed that he had access to sensitive financial information and was trusted because of his long banking career. Police did not publicly name suspects, but they acknowledged that financial disputes and broken trust can escalate quickly when large sums of money are involved. At the same time, investigators could not dismiss the possibility that Nick and Lisa disappeared by choice. Police confirmed that there had been no ransom demands, no financial extortion attempts, and no communication from anyone claiming responsibility. This absence stood out. In cases involving abduction for profit, some form of contact is typically made. Here there was nothing. The silence itself became part of the mystery. Detectives also examined the couple's personal behavior in the months leading up to their disappearance. Friends and co-workers were asked whether Nick or Lisa had expressed fear, talked about leaving, or shown signs of planning a major change. The answers were inconsistent. Some described stress and pressure, while others said the couple seemed optimistic about future plans. No single pattern emerged that clearly pointed in one direction. Media attention added another layer of complexity. As details of the case became public, speculation intensified. Tips increased in volume, but declined in quality. Investigators received reports of alleged sightings across Canada and beyond, none of which could be confirmed. Each false lead drained time and resources, slowing progress even further. By this point, police privately acknowledged a grim reality. Without new evidence, the case was unlikely to move forward in a traditional way. Yet they also believed that whatever happened to Nick and Lisa did not end naturally. Whether through deception or violence, something had gone seriously wrong. The challenge was proving it. As years passed, the file remained open but unresolved. The next phase of the case would depend not on what police could find, but on whether someone, somewhere, would finally come forward with the missing piece that had never surfaced. As the years turned into decades, the disappearance of Nick and Lisa Masée shifted from an active investigation into a long-term cold case. Police files remained open, but without new physical evidence or credible witnesses, progress stalled. Internally, investigators came to believe that the couple was no longer alive, though this conclusion was never formally proven. Without bodies, confessions, or forensic confirmation, the case could not be legally closed as a homicide. Nick's adult children continued to push for answers. They worked with police, spoke publicly about the case, and urged anyone with information to come forward. On the 25th anniversary of the disappearance, renewed attention was brought to the investigation. A financial reward was increased to $50,000 in hopes that time, guilt, or changing circumstances might finally loosen someone's silence. Despite the renewed exposure, no decisive lead emerged. What continues to haunt investigators is the narrow window in which the disappearance occurred. There was no verified activity tied to Nick or Lisa after the brief phone calls placed to the morning following their last confirmed movements. No bank accounts were used, no travel records surfaced, no confirmed sightings held up under scrutiny. In an age before widespread digital tracking, that absence of trace made it possible for answers to vanish along with them. Today, the case stands as one of Vancouver's most unsettling mysteries. It is a reminder of how quickly a seemingly successful life can collapse into uncertainty, and how appearances can hide deep instability. Whether Nick and Lisa Masée were silenced by others or vanished through their own calculated decisions remains unknown. What is clear is that someone, somewhere, knows what truly happened. Until that truth is revealed, the story remains unfinished. A quiet house, unanswered questions, and a disappearance that refuses to fade continue to cast a long shadow over Vancouver. The investigation waits, frozen in time, for the one detail that could finally bring clarity to a mystery that has endured for more than 3 decades. Cynthia Elizabeth Hack was born on June 12, 1944, in the small town of Oliver, British Columbia, Canada. She was the daughter of Otto and Matilda Hack. Her father was a strict and disciplined English teacher who had also served as a colonel in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Her mother, known to family as Tilly, was a homemaker. Cindy was one of 6 children, with 3 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her family was of Russian heritage, and for part of her youth, she lived in Ottawa because of her father's military career. Cindy's upbringing was shaped by her father's firm and traditional parenting style. In her personal diaries, she wrote that her father had been very strict, and that she sometimes feared his disciplinary actions, which included physical punishment. Despite this, she did well in school, and eventually found her passion in the healthcare field. In 1962, Cindy enrolled in nursing school in Vancouver. During this time, her family had moved to France after her father re-enlisted in the military. Cindy visited them during her holidays, and in letters home, she wrote about a man she claimed to be engaged to, an intern she had met while in training. According to her, this man had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and tragically took his own life while the two were on a skiing trip. However, her family never met him, and she never shared his name. In the summer of 1965, Cindy met Roy Makepeace, a psychiatrist from South Africa who was 18 years older than she was. They married in December of the following year. The same year, Cindy graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Her family had concerns about the relationship, especially her father, who believed Makepeace had taken advantage of Cindy's trusting nature. Cindy began working as a pediatric nurse at Vancouver General Hospital, where Makepeace had also worked at one point. Though they had professional success, their marriage grew strained over time. Cindy later claimed that the relationship was abusive, while Makepeace denied this, saying he had only ever slapped her twice during their marriage. Despite earning a medical license in South Africa, Makepeace failed to pass licensing exams in Canada and instead took a position at the University of British Columbia. In 1975, Cindy started working at Blenheim House, a care facility for children with behavioral issues. She served as a team coordinator and remained there for over a decade. Her co-workers described her as kind, dedicated, and professional. Although her marriage to Makepeace had ended by this point, the two remained in occasional contact. To others, Cindy appeared to be living a normal, successful life. She had a respected career, maintained close ties with her family, and was known for being responsible and compassionate. But beneath the surface, something was changing. In the early 1980s, a different story began to emerge. One of fear, confusion, and danger. It started with a strange phone call, and from there, Cindy's life would slowly unravel into one of the most baffling and controversial mysteries in Canadian history. In the early months of 1982, Cindy James began experiencing a series of events that would quickly spiral into something far more terrifying. She reported receiving anonymous phone calls, some silent, others filled with whispers, threats, or heavy breathing. These calls often came late at night, leaving her shaken and afraid. At first, she tried to brush them off, believing they might be pranks, but the calls continued, growing in intensity and frequency. Not long after the phone calls began, Cindy started discovering threatening notes around her home. These were often made from magazine clippings or written in crude block letters. One note read, "Soon, Cindy," while others simply said, "Dead meat." She also began finding disturbing items left on her doorstep, including pieces of raw meat and dead cats. Her front porch light was smashed several times, and someone began cutting the phone lines leading into her house. Fearing for her safety, Cindy contacted the Vancouver Police Department and filed her first report. Over the next several years, she would make nearly 100 calls to the police. Officers visited her home repeatedly, and investigators opened files on what they referred to as a stalking case. Cindy said she had no idea who was behind the harassment, but she believed someone was watching her every move. In January of 1983, she was attacked in her home for the first time. She told police that she had gone outside to check her car when someone grabbed her from behind. She said the assailant choked her with a cord and slashed her hand with a knife before fleeing. Cindy was terrified and confused. She was taken to a hospital, and photos were taken of her injuries. The police found no signs of forced entry, and neighbors reported seeing nothing unusual. As the incidents escalated, Cindy began altering her lifestyle. She painted her car a different color and changed her last name from Makepeace to James, hoping it would help her avoid the person tormenting her. She moved homes several times and even hired private investigators. One of them, Ozzy Caban, took her claims seriously and installed surveillance equipment, but no intruder was ever captured on camera. She also began to record every suspicious activity, keeping detailed notes of each event. On multiple occasions, she reported seeing a man lurking around her property. Once, she claimed to have seen someone peering into her windows. Police conducted interviews and staked out her home at times, but there were no arrests and no suspects. By 1984, Cindy's mental health began to deteriorate. Friends and family noticed she was becoming withdrawn, anxious, and sleep-deprived. Some began to wonder if the stress was causing her to imagine the events. Others believed she was genuinely in danger, but that the police weren't taking her seriously enough. Then came another disturbing incident. One evening, Cindy was found semi-conscious in her basement, with a nylon stocking tightly wound around her neck. Her hands and feet were tied. She had no memory of how she got there. A neighbor found her and called emergency services. Once again, the police found no sign of forced entry. Investigators began to question whether Cindy might have staged the attack herself. Despite the growing doubts around her case, Cindy insisted she was not doing these things to herself. She feared she was being watched, followed, and targeted. And in the following years, the violence against her would only intensify, leading to outcomes even more disturbing than before. By the spring of 1985, Cindy James's situation had grown even more disturbing. On multiple occasions, she was discovered in alarming conditions, injured and disoriented, often with no clear memory of how she had ended up that way. One incident took place in a ditch 6 miles from her home, where she was found with her hands and feet bound and a black nylon stocking once again tied around her neck. Her clothes had been ripped, and she had several bruises on her body. Medical staff noted that she appeared sedated, though no drugs were immediately found in her system. Despite these attacks, authorities were increasingly skeptical. Each time Cindy was found bound or hurt, there were no witnesses and no forensic evidence pointing to another person. Many officers within the Vancouver Police Department began to theorize that Cindy was orchestrating the incidents herself, either to seek attention or as a result of psychological trauma. However, not everyone agreed. Her private investigator, Ozzy Caban, believed that the injuries Cindy suffered were too elaborate and dangerous for her to have inflicted on herself without assistance. In one particularly troubling event, in December of 1985, Cindy was found dazed and hypothermic in a ditch with a pair of men's work boots on her feet and a pair of gloves in her hands that did not belong to her. She had been missing for several hours after failing to meet a friend for dinner. A local passerby spotted her and contacted emergency services. Once again, she had no memory of what had happened after leaving her home. In response to the growing fear for her life, Cindy took several protective measures. She adopted a large dog, installed a panic button system in her house, and began carrying pepper spray. She also continued working with private investigators. At one point, her friend and ex-husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace, allowed her to stay at his residence temporarily, hoping she would feel safer. Despite these efforts, the strange incidents persisted. During this time, Cindy also underwent extensive psychological evaluations. She visited several psychiatrists and therapists, some of whom diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative symptoms. However, none of them could agree on a definitive diagnosis. Cindy expressed genuine terror during these sessions, and her accounts remained consistent. She often spoke about a mysterious group or individual who she believed was determined to harm or kill her. Law enforcement surveillance was occasionally put in place near her home, but these operations never caught any suspects in the act. Some officers felt this further proved that the events were self-inflicted. Others believed that whoever was responsible may have been carefully watching Cindy and knew when surveillance was in place, choosing to strike only when the coast was clear. Between the years of 1986 and early 1989, Cindy moved multiple times and even changed her phone number several times. Still, the threatening messages and incidents continued. One time, a rock was thrown through her window with a note attached. Another time, she returned home to find her dog beaten and her porch light smashed once again. In several cases, her telephone wires were found deliberately cut, always cleanly severed, suggesting it was not the result of wear or accident. Throughout all of this, her mental and physical health continued to decline. Friends and family were increasingly divided. Some were convinced Cindy was being stalked by someone who had outsmarted the police for years. Others worried that the stress had taken such a toll on her that she may have been unintentionally creating the danger herself. No clear answers were found. But then, in the summer of 1989, Cindy vanished, marking the final and most tragic chapter in her long, strange ordeal. On the evening of Thursday, May 25th, 1989, Cindy James disappeared. Earlier that day, she had stopped by the Richmond General Hospital to pick up her paycheck. Afterward, she went to a local shopping center to run errands. Witnesses later confirmed that she mailed a letter and deposited her check at a nearby bank. She was last seen around 8 o'clock that night. Cindy never made it home. The following day, her car, a beige sedan, was discovered parked in a lot behind an abandoned grocery store. Inside the vehicle were several of her personal belongings, including the groceries she had just purchased, a wrapped gift, and her wallet, which contained a small amount of cash. Blood was found on the driver's side door and on some of the items inside the vehicle. Curiously, the car keys were found beneath the vehicle on the ground. It appeared as though the scene had been staged, but investigators were unable to confirm what had actually occurred. It was not until Friday, June 8th, almost 2 full weeks later, that Cindy's body was discovered. A man walking near an abandoned house in Richmond, not far from where her car had been found, noticed something unusual in the overgrown backyard. Cindy's body was lying in tall grass, partially hidden. Her hands and feet had been bound behind her back with black nylon, and a similar black nylon stocking had been tied tightly around her neck. She was fully clothed. An autopsy confirmed that she had been deceased for a significant period, likely since the day she disappeared. Toxicology results revealed a combination of 3 drugs in her system: morphine, diazepam, and flurazepam. The levels of these drugs were high enough to render her unconscious, or possibly even cause death. However, the exact cause of death was not immediately determined. While the drugs were lethal, the ligature marks on her neck were consistent with strangulation, though they may have occurred after death. The circumstances of Cindy's death created immediate conflict between investigators. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police concluded that Cindy had taken her own life. They believed she had injected herself with a dangerous drug cocktail, tied herself up, and staged her own death in a final elaborate act. However, many medical experts, and nearly all of her family and friends, found this explanation unconvincing. For one, there was serious doubt that Cindy could have physically bound herself in such a complex manner after taking such powerful drugs. The tightness and positioning of the restraints suggested she had little to no mobility at the time they were applied. Several forensic specialists stated that the combination of drugs would have rendered her unconscious within minutes. There was also the issue of the nylon stocking around her neck, something that had been a repeated symbol throughout the years of harassment. Her ex-husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace, publicly disputed the theory that she took her own life. So did her sister Melanie and her parents, Otto and Tilly Hack. They firmly believed Cindy had been murdered and that the police had failed to protect her despite years of warning signs. Private investigator Ozzy Caban also stated that in his experience, the death had all the signs of foul play, not a result of her taking her own life. A coroner's inquest was held in the spring of 1990. It lasted over 15 days, included testimony from 84 witnesses, and examined nearly 100 exhibits. In the end, the jury was unable to determine how Cindy James had died. They ruled the cause of death as undetermined, meaning it could have been accidental, self-inflicted, or the result of foul play. To this day, the death of Cindy James remains one of Canada's most haunting, unsolved cases. There has never been an arrest. No one has been named as a suspect. And perhaps most frustratingly of all, despite the evidence, warnings, and bizarre pattern of incidents over 7 years, there is still no official answer to the question. Who, if anyone, was trying to kill Cindy James? Or was she struggling with something even more difficult to understand? The case continues to be the subject of books, documentaries, and debates, each offering its own theory. But the truth, like Cindy herself, seems to have vanished in the shadows. In the early 1990s, Nelson, British Columbia, was a quiet town nestled between mountains and lakes, where life moved slowly and neighbors knew each other by name. It was here that 19-year-old Aimee Beaulieu tried to build a new beginning for herself and her infant twins, David and Samantha. She was a young mother with a determined spirit, known to friends as independent and caring, someone who had already faced more than her share of hardship. Aimee had recently escaped an abusive relationship in Summerland, a decision that took enormous courage. She left behind the familiar and the familiar dangers alike, moving hundreds of kilometers north with her babies to seek safety in the Nelson area. Settling into a modest trailer at Klein's Trailer Park, she was just a few steps away from her mother, Judy, who lived in the neighboring unit. It was meant to be a safe space, a sanctuary, where a mother could care for her children without fear. In the weeks after her move, Aimee began the slow process of building a life for her family. She enrolled in a community program, connected with local friends, and tried to create the kind of normal childhood for her twins that she herself had never fully experienced. But the shadows of her past were never far behind. The man she had fled was still in Summerland, and the threat of violence loomed over her, though she may not have known the extent of the danger she faced. Friends described Aimee as protective and resilient. She was always alert, always cautious, making sure her babies were safe while navigating the challenges of single parenthood. Her plans were simple: keep her children healthy, stay close to her family, and finally, feel secure. Yet even in a town as peaceful as Nelson, fate can take sudden and cruel turns. On the night of April 1st, 1992, that sense of security would be shattered forever. The trailer that was meant to be her refuge would instead become the setting of a crime that would haunt the town for decades. Aimee's determination and bravery could not protect her from a tragedy that would ripple through her family, her community, and the entire province. The early investigation would reveal troubling clues. The fire that consumed her trailer was deliberate, intended to destroy evidence, and the timeline of her last known movements raised difficult questions. Neighbors recalled that the trailer had been unusually quiet that evening, a silence that made the first signs of smoke all the more alarming. By the time police arrived, the scene was already engulfed in flames, masking what had occurred inside. Even from the beginning, this was a case that challenged investigators. There were very few leads, almost no forensic evidence intact, and a crime so carefully orchestrated that the most basic questions, who, how, and why, remained unanswered. Part of the horror of Aimee's murder lies in the fact that it was preventable, that she had done everything to protect herself and her children, and yet the danger still found her. As the sun rose over Nelson on April 2nd, 1992, the community was confronted with the devastating reality. A young mother and her twins were gone, and their deaths were anything but accidental. From this point onward, the case would become one of British Columbia's most haunting unsolved murders, a puzzle filled with heartbreak, unanswered questions, and a relentless search for justice that continues to this day. In the early hours of April 2nd, 1992, the quiet streets of Klein's trailer park were suddenly pierced by the flickering glow of flames. Smoke rose into the still night sky, noticed by neighbors and passing patrols from the Nelson police. Constables Fred Mansveld and Warren Weber were among the first on the scene, responding to reports of a trailer fire that seemed dangerously close to propane tanks. The situation demanded immediate action. Every second mattered. As the officers moved closer, the reality of the situation became horrifyingly clear. The trailer belonging to Aimee Beaulieu was fully involved in fire, and the risk to human life was evident. Mansveld and Weber quickly began evacuating neighbors, banging on doors and guiding frightened residents to safety. Among them was Judy Beaulieu, Aimee's mother, who lived next door. Upon learning the trailer on fire was Aimee's, she screamed in panic, fearing for her daughter and the twins, David and Samantha. Firefighters arrived moments later, the first among them Jamie Spence, who ran into the blaze with remarkable bravery. Thick smoke and intense heat made entry almost impossible, but Spence managed to reach the twins, carrying them to waiting officers. The infants were rushed to the hospital in critical condition, though tragically, neither survived. Their deaths were later determined to have been caused by smoke inhalation, a chilling reminder of how quickly the fire had consumed the trailer. Inside the charred remains of the trailer, investigators made a further horrifying discovery. Aimee herself had died before the fire was ever lit. Evidence indicated that she had been strangled, showing that the flames were not the cause of death but a deliberate attempt to destroy any clues that could lead to the perpetrator. It was a level of planning that shocked both the police and the community, confirming that this was no accident but a calculated murder. Investigators began piecing together the sequence of events. They discovered that the trailer's smoke alarm had been rendered inoperable. The battery was removed, ensuring there would be no warning. This detail indicated careful forethought by the killer, an understanding of how to cover their tracks completely. The crime scene was chaotic but revealing, showing both the cruelty of the act and the careful planning behind it. Neighbors and friends provided testimony that painted a picture of a determined, independent young mother who had taken every precaution to protect her children. Witness statements were collected, and the RCMP began compiling timelines and searching for anyone who might have seen something unusual that night. Every lead was pursued, though the fire had destroyed much of the forensic evidence that might have provided a clear path to the killer. By the end of that long, tragic night, it was apparent that this case would not be simple to solve. The combination of murder and arson presented investigators with almost insurmountable challenges. Despite their best efforts, the identity of the person who had entered the trailer and killed Aimee remained unknown. For the Beaulieu family and the Nelson community, the sense of loss was compounded by the chilling realization that someone had deliberately taken a mother and her children and left behind almost no evidence. The night of April 2nd, 1992, marked the beginning of a decades-long investigation, one defined by its complexity, tragedy, and lingering questions. every step forward would be met with the frustration of missing evidence and unanswered questions as investigators tried to navigate the shadowy circumstances surrounding the murders. The search for justice had begun, but the path would be long and uncertain. In the days following April 2nd, 1992, the RCMP launched a full-scale investigation into the deaths of Aimee Beaulieu and her twins. The small city of Nelson was in shock, struggling to comprehend how such a calculated crime could occur in a quiet trailer park. Officers meticulously combed through the charred remains of Aimee's home, looking for any clue that might identify the killer. Every scrap of evidence was photographed, cataloged, and analyzed, but the fire had destroyed much of the physical material that could have led to an arrest. Investigators quickly turned their attention to those closest to Aimee. Her recent history, particularly her escape from an abusive relationship in Summerland, made her ex-partner a primary focus. He had motive, and his past behavior raised concerns, but without concrete evidence connecting him to the trailer that night, police were forced to proceed cautiously. Interviews with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances were conducted to build a timeline, but no witness had seen anyone entering or leaving the trailer before the fire started. The RCMP also considered other possibilities. Although domestic violence was the most prominent theory, officers explored the potential involvement of acquaintances or individuals with grudges, as well as any connections to criminal activity. Tips poured in from the community, but many were vague or unverified. The challenge was compounded by the fact that the crime had been carefully planned to leave almost no traces. The removal of the smoke alarm battery, the quick timing of the fire, and the fact that Aimee was strangled before the flames were set all suggested someone with knowledge and intent. During this period, forensic analysis was conducted on the remains that were recoverable. Police examined fibers, ashes, and other trace materials for any link to a suspect. Even with modern forensic techniques at the time, the fire had removed nearly all the evidence that might have definitively tied someone to the crime scene. The investigation was hampered by this lack of physical proof, forcing the RCMP to rely heavily on circumstantial evidence and witness statements. Family and friends provided detailed accounts of Aimee's life, her daily routines, and her interactions leading up to the night of her death. They painted a picture of a young mother determined to protect her children and rebuild her life. Each interview helped investigators narrow down timelines and focus on potential suspects, but no arrest could be made without solid evidence. For the Beaulieu family, each day without answers added to the anguish, as the fear and uncertainty of a killer walking free weighed heavily on them. The RCMP also examined the broader community for leads, speaking with local residents and business owners. Surveillance in the area at the time was minimal, and no security footage existed to show the movements around the trailer park. Investigators relied on tips from the public and painstaking interviews to try to recreate the events leading up to the murders. Each small detail was scrutinized for inconsistencies, but the trail was frustratingly cold. By the end of April 1992, the investigation had officially identified the ex-partner as the primary suspect, but the lack of definitive proof meant that no charges could be laid. The case became a tense balancing act between pursuing leads and respecting legal standards, as officers were acutely aware that any misstep could jeopardize a future prosecution. Meanwhile, the community remained on edge, fearful that the person responsible had left without leaving any trace. As weeks turned into months, the case slowly grew colder. The RCMP maintained regular communication with Aimee's family, updating them on developments while continuing to follow every potential lead. Despite their efforts, the prime suspect remained legally untouchable, and the investigation entered a long, difficult period where answers were scarce and justice felt out of reach. The mystery of who had killed Aimee and her children only deepened, leaving lingering questions that haunted Nelson and the Beaulieu family. As the years passed, the case of Aimee Beaulieu and her twin children remained officially unsolved, and the community of Nelson continued to search for answers. Investigators revisited the case multiple times, examining old leads and re-interviewing witnesses in hopes that new details might emerge. Each review highlighted the extreme planning behind the murders, including the deliberate setting of the fire and the removal of the smoke alarm battery, showing a level of calculation meant to erase the perpetrator's presence. The most widely discussed theory remained focused on Aimee's ex-partner from Summerland. Police considered him the prime suspect because of his history of abusive behavior and the potential motive stemming from jealousy and anger over Aimee leaving him. Although many in the community supported this theory, investigators were cautious. Without physical evidence linking him directly to the scene, it was impossible to lay charges, and the law required a standard of proof that could not be met. Over the decades, other theories surfaced in local discussions and media coverage. Some suggested that Aimee may have been targeted because of disputes with acquaintances in Nelson or minor criminal activity she might have unknowingly been involved with. While these ideas sparked interest, none had credible evidence to support them. Every lead had to be carefully vetted, but the intentional destruction of evidence by the fire meant that there were few concrete paths for investigators to follow. Cold case investigators also relied on advances in forensic technology, including DNA testing and modern analysis techniques that were unavailable in 1992. Samples recovered from the scene and preserved over the years were reviewed multiple times, yet none produced actionable results. The fire had eliminated most traces that could have been used for comparison, and the case remained frustratingly closed in terms of physical evidence. Community members and local journalists kept Aimee's story alive, highlighting the tragedy and emphasizing the importance of protecting vulnerable people from domestic violence. Public interest occasionally led to tips and rumors, some of which reignited brief investigative pushes. However, with no corroborating evidence, these tips rarely led to concrete leads. The case became emblematic of the challenges faced by investigators when a murder is premeditated and meticulously planned to leave no trace. Family members continued to advocate for justice, especially Aimee's mother, Judy, who worked tirelessly to ensure her daughter and grandchildren were not forgotten. In interviews, she consistently emphasized the cold, deliberate nature of the crime, stating that the killer had meant to erase Aimee's life entirely. Her advocacy also led to the establishment of resources for women in crisis, ensuring that even in the shadow of tragedy, some good could emerge. Despite the passage of decades, the case remained one of British Columbia's most haunting cold cases. Every new piece of technology or investigative technique offered hope, but the killer had left almost no evidence. For the RCMP and Nelson community, the sense of urgency persisted. A crime so personal, so deliberate, had left a void in justice that could not be ignored. The story of Aimee Beaulieu, David, and Samantha was not only a tragedy of loss, but also a stark reminder of how fleeting safety can be. Even in a quiet trailer park, surrounded by family and neighbors, violence could arrive silently and with devastating impact. The questions of who and why continued to linger, unresolved but never forgotten, keeping the case alive in the minds of investigators and the public alike. More than 3 decades after the murder of Aimee Beaulieu and the deaths of her twin children, the case remains officially unsolved. The RCMP have classified it as a cold case, but the file is never fully closed. Investigators periodically review old leads, hoping that someone with new information might come forward. Over the years, technological advances in DNA and forensic analysis have been applied to preserved evidence, yet no actionable results have emerged, leaving law enforcement with frustratingly few options. For the community of Nelson, Aimee's story has become a symbol of both tragedy and the ongoing struggle to protect vulnerable people. Her mother, Judy, has remained vocal, emphasizing the importance of awareness around domestic violence and the need to ensure that young women and children have safe spaces. In 1995, the Aimee Beaulieu Transition House was opened in Nelson, providing shelter and support for women and children fleeing abuse. Over the years, nearly 25,000 individuals have been assisted, keeping Aimee's memory alive and turning grief into action. The unresolved nature of the case has also served as a cautionary tale about the challenges investigators face when a crime is meticulously planned. The perpetrator left few clues, and the deliberate destruction of evidence in the fire complicated every step of the investigation. Investigators have stressed that even decades later, a small tip or piece of information could change everything. Police continued to appeal to the public for any knowledge of the events surrounding April 1st into April 2nd, 1992, reminding potential witnesses that no detail is too small. Public interest in the case has never waned. News outlets, podcasts, and local historians continue to revisit the story, keeping it in the public eye. Online forums and advocacy groups have kept discussions alive, emphasizing the human impact of the tragedy rather than focusing solely on speculation. This sustained attention ensures that the victims are remembered not just as numbers, but as real people whose lives were stolen. Despite decades without closure, hope persists. Every year, the RCMP and community advocates reiterate their commitment to finding justice for Aimee, David, and Samantha. The case represents not only a personal loss, but also a broader warning about the dangers of domestic violence and the importance of community vigilance. Families affected by similar tragedies often look to this case as an example of the need for ongoing support, both for victims and for those seeking answers. The murder of Aimee Beaulieu remains a haunting reminder of how quickly life can be shattered, even in seemingly safe surroundings. Her story, and that of her infants, continues to resonate across British Columbia, highlighting the fragility of security and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. Yet, through the Aimee Beaulieu Transition House and ongoing public awareness efforts, her legacy also inspires resilience, advocacy, and the hope that one day, justice may finally be served. While the identity of her killer remains unknown, the search for truth endures. Nelson remembers, and law enforcement remains ready to act should new evidence arise, for the family, the community, and anyone following the case. The memory of Aimee and her children is a call to never forget the human cost behind cold case investigations. The story of Aimee Beaulieu stands as both a tragic loss and a beacon for change, a chilling but crucial chapter in Canadian true crime history. Gilbert Paul Jordan, born Gilbert Paul Elsie on December 12, 1931, came into the world in Vancouver, British Columbia. His upbringing was not one of severe poverty or extreme violence, but it was shaped by rules and restrictions that he would later rebel against. His mother was a strict Christian who banned alcohol from the family home. This early prohibition may have only deepened his curiosity for drinking, because by his teenage years, alcohol had already taken a strong hold on his life. He left school in the 8th grade and never returned to formal education. By the time he was 16, he was a daily drinker, and alcohol was already guiding his choices. This was the beginning of a lifetime struggle that would not only destroy his own future, but also take the lives of others. Without education or stability, Jordan drifted into trouble with the law, beginning a criminal record in the early 1950s. His first known conviction came in 1952, marking the start of decades of arrests for crimes ranging from theft to assault. As a young man, Jordan was already known for erratic and often aggressive behavior, especially when drinking. He seemed unable or unwilling to control himself, and over the years, his reputation as a troublemaker grew. Police encounters became common, and each new arrest added to a pattern of disregard for rules and authority. Despite the growing list of charges, most of them resulted in minimal punishment, allowing him to quickly return to the streets. Jordan's dependence on alcohol was more than a personal habit. It became part of his identity. He was known to drink extreme amounts, boasting in later years about consuming more than 50 ounces of vodka a day. Even in his early adulthood, this level of drinking made him a figure people remembered, though not always for the right reasons. During this time, he picked up various labor jobs, but rarely kept steady work. His relationships were unstable, and he often surrounded himself with others who shared his heavy drinking lifestyle. Yet beneath this chaotic surface, there were early signs of something far more dangerous, an ability to charm or disarm people just long enough to take advantage of them. These years, in the 1950s and early 1960s, would lay the foundation for the disturbing pattern he would later follow. Jordan's addiction, combined with his willingness to break the law and his growing boldness, set the stage for a method of killing, unlike anything Canadian law enforcement had seen before. But at this point, his crimes had not yet escalated to murder, at least not officially. That would come later, and when it did, it would shock the country. By the mid-1960s, Gilbert Paul Jordan had moved beyond petty crimes and drunken disturbances. His encounters with the law became more frequent and more concerning. Police reports from this period described him as unpredictable, especially when heavily intoxicated. His drinking was no longer a habit. It was a compulsion that shaped every aspect of his life. Jordan began spending much of his time in Vancouver's downtown east side, a neighborhood known for poverty, addiction, and a vulnerable population. Here he found a constant supply of drinking companions, many of whom were struggling with alcohol dependency themselves. This environment provided him with both cover for his behavior and a pool of potential victims. In 1961, Jordan was convicted of indecent assault, marking his first recorded offense that hinted at a willingness to harm others directly. Over the next decade, he accumulated more charges, including theft, assault, and disorderly conduct. While many offenders might try to stay out of trouble after multiple arrests, Jordan seemed to thrive on risk. He learned how to manipulate situations, often using his ability to drink vast amounts of alcohol as a kind of performance to impress or disarm people. By the early 1970s, his alcohol tolerance had reached a staggering level. Witnesses claimed he could consume extraordinary amounts in a single sitting without losing complete control. Jordan began using this ability in a way that would later horrify investigators, encouraging others to drink with him, sometimes in dangerous quantities. His method was subtle at first. He would buy drinks for people he met in bars or on the street, often targeting those who were already intoxicated or in need of companionship. He presented himself as a generous drinking partner, but his true intentions were far darker. In these early years, there is evidence to suggest that deaths linked to extreme alcohol consumption may have occurred around him, though no official murder charges were filed at the time. Jordan's encounters with police during this period followed a pattern: short arrests, minimal sentences, and quick releases. Law enforcement often saw him as just another chronic drunk causing trouble, unaware that his behavior was developing into something far more deliberate. By the end of the 1970s, Jordan had refined a deadly approach that relied on alcohol, both as a weapon and as a shield. It was a method that would eventually make him one of Canada's most unusual serial killers, someone who didn't need a firearm or a knife to take a life, just a bottle and a plan. In the years ahead, this pattern would escalate, leaving a trail of suspicious deaths that few initially connected to the man behind them. In the early 1980s, Gilbert Paul Jordan's drinking habit had become his signature and his weapon. By this time, he was well known in certain parts of Vancouver's downtown east side, often spotted in bars, hotels, and inexpensive rooming houses. What few people realized was that his heavy drinking sessions with women were sometimes ending in tragedy. Jordan began frequenting establishments where vulnerable women, many of them living with addiction or financial hardship, could be found. He would offer drinks, companionship, and sometimes cash. His charm was limited, but his persistence and willingness to spend money often overcame initial hesitation. Once a woman agreed to join him, Jordan's drinking challenges would begin. He would urge them to match him drink for drink, sometimes adding strong liquor to their beverages without them noticing. From 1980 to 1987, several women died in circumstances that police initially attributed to accidental alcohol poisoning. The victims shared similarities. Most were found in hotel rooms or private residences shortly after spending time with Jordan, and all had extremely high blood alcohol levels. In some cases, the levels were so high they would have been lethal to most people. At first, these incidents were treated as isolated tragedies in a neighborhood already plagued by alcohol-related deaths. Autopsies showed no signs of physical violence, and with little evidence beyond the presence of alcohol, investigators often closed the cases without further inquiry. Jordan seemed to understand this gap in law enforcement attention and used it to his advantage. During this period, witnesses occasionally reported hearing Jordan urging women to keep drinking, sometimes offering incentives or making it a competitive game. In one instance, a bartender recalled him encouraging a visibly impaired woman to have another, even when she was struggling to remain conscious. Police records show that Jordan continued to face minor charges for public drunkenness and disorderly behavior throughout these years, but none connected him directly to the deaths. The absence of overt violence allowed him to operate without serious scrutiny, even as the number of unexplained alcohol-related fatalities around him grew. By the mid-1980s, whispers about Jordan's possible involvement in these deaths began circulating among some in the community. Still, without clear evidence, law enforcement had no grounds for a serious criminal case. It would take one final, highly suspicious death to bring him into the full focus of investigators and expose the deadly pattern he had perfected over years. By late 1987, police in Vancouver began noticing troubling similarities in a series of alcohol-related deaths involving women. Reports from coroners revealed that several victims had blood alcohol levels far beyond what would normally be survivable. In more than one case, the last person seen with these women was Gilbert Paul Jordan. The turning point came in November of that year. Jordan had checked into a local hotel with a woman, and within hours, she was found dead. Her blood alcohol level was recorded at more than 4 times the legal limit for driving, a concentration considered life-threatening. Staff members recalled seeing Jordan leave the room alone, calm and unhurried. This time, however, police decided not to treat the case as just another unfortunate accident. Investigators quietly began tracking Jordan's movements. Over the course of several days, undercover officers observed him visiting bars, approaching women, and enticing them to drink heavily. They documented conversations in which he repeatedly urged the women to consume more alcohol, sometimes offering cash or making lighthearted bets to encourage them. During this surveillance period, officers intervened more than once to prevent potential tragedies. In one incident, they entered a hotel room to find a woman unconscious, with Jordan beside her. She was rushed to the hospital, where medical staff determined her blood alcohol level was dangerously high, but not yet fatal. This confirmed the suspicion that his behavior was not coincidental, but deliberate. Police soon gathered enough evidence to connect Jordan to multiple suspicious deaths dating back several years. The challenge was that the manner of killing, forcing or persuading victims to consume lethal amounts of alcohol, was legally complex to prosecute, especially since there were rarely physical signs of assault. Still, investigators pressed forward, compiling a case that would focus on the most recent incidents, where evidence and witness testimony were strongest. By the end of November 1987, Jordan was arrested and formally charged in connection with the death of one woman and the attempted killings of several others. His arrest made headlines across Canada, shocking the public with the unusual and unsettling nature of his alleged crimes. While the details would emerge more fully in court, it was already clear that the authorities had finally cornered a man who had managed to operate in plain sight for years without serious consequence. The trial of Gilbert Paul Jordan began in early 1988. Prosecutors focused on his pattern of behavior, presenting evidence from the hotel surveillance, witness statements, and coroner reports. They emphasized how Jordan had repeatedly supplied alcohol to vulnerable women, resulting in fatal overdoses, and how police had intervened to prevent additional deaths. The courtroom heard how his actions over more than 2 decades created a deadly pattern that distinguished him from accidental cases of alcohol poisoning. Jordan pleaded not guilty, maintaining that the deaths were unintentional and that he had no criminal intent. The defense argued that the women were responsible for their own alcohol consumption. However, the prosecution successfully used similar fact evidence, showing a consistent pattern of behavior across multiple incidents. This approach allowed the jury to see a clear link between Jordan's actions and the deaths, demonstrating that the fatalities were not isolated accidents. After several weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict in late 1988. Gilbert Paul Jordan was found guilty of manslaughter in the death of Vanessa Lee Buckner, as well as charges related to the attempted deaths of other women. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, though his sentence was later reduced on appeal. He served 6 years before being released on parole in 1994. Despite the relatively short prison term, Jordan's case remained a stark example of the legal challenges in prosecuting deaths caused indirectly by a perpetrator. The impact of the case extended beyond the courtroom. It raised awareness of how marginalized communities, particularly Indigenous women struggling with addiction, could be systematically overlooked by authorities. Public debate focused on the responsibility of society to protect vulnerable populations and the need for better investigative procedures. Jordan's ability to evade serious charges for so long highlighted significant gaps in policing, law enforcement coordination, and social services. Gilbert Paul Jordan died in 2006 from health complications related to his long-term alcoholism. While he was never convicted of murder, his legacy remains one of infamy in Canadian criminal history. The case continues to be studied by criminologists, law enforcement, and advocates for vulnerable communities as a warning of how easily predators can exploit societal neglect. Ultimately, the story of Gilbert Paul Jordan is not just about a single man, but about systemic failures, overlooked victims, and the importance of vigilance in protecting those most at risk. His crimes serve as a reminder of the dark consequences when society fails to act, leaving vulnerable people exposed to harm for far too long. On the afternoon of October 19th, 2007, Surrey, British Columbia, felt calm and ordinary. The Whalley neighborhood was busy in the way it always was, with people running errands, heading home from work, and moving through the halls of residential buildings without a second thought. Inside the Balmoral Tower, a high-rise filled with families and working people, life followed its usual rhythm. Nothing about that Friday suggested it would become one of the darkest days in modern Canadian crime history. The Balmoral Tower was not known as a dangerous place. It was a mixed residential building where neighbors passed each other in elevators and hallways every day. Parents raised children there. Workers came and went. Behind its concrete walls, it looked like just another apartment building in a growing city. But hidden behind one door on the 15th floor was a secret that would soon pull innocent people into a violent world they never chose to enter. Apartment 1505 was being used as a drug stash location, tied to a small local group involved in street-level trafficking. This kind of operation was meant to stay quiet and unnoticed. The people involved believed they could blend into normal life without drawing attention. What they did not realize was that their actions had already placed them in the crosshairs of a far more powerful criminal organization operating across the Lower Mainland. At the same time, completely separate lives were unfolding just feet away. A gas fitter named Ed Schellenberg was inside the building doing routine service work. He was a husband and a father, known for being reliable and hardworking. Across the hall, Christopher Mohan, a young man in his early 20s, was at home with his family, thinking about an ordinary afternoon ahead. Neither man had any connection to crime, gangs, or the drug trade. They were simply living their lives in the wrong place on the wrong day. What no one in the building knew was that decisions made weeks earlier had already set a deadly plan into motion. A dispute over control, money, and respect within Surrey's criminal underworld was about to erupt. The violence that followed would not stay contained behind closed doors. It would spill into a residential hallway and forever change the lives of families, investigators, and an entire community. By the end of that afternoon, 6 men would be dead, 2 of them completely innocent. The case would become known across Canada as the Surrey Six Massacre, a crime that exposed how close organized violence can come to everyday life. In the next part, the focus turns to the hidden conflict that led powerful criminals to target a single apartment, and why they were willing to risk everything to send a message. The violence that came to the Balmoral Tower did not begin there. It started weeks earlier within Surrey's drug underworld, where territory and reputation mattered more than life. At the center of the conflict was Corey Lal, a young drug dealer who led a small group operating independently in the city. His crew was not large or especially powerful, but they controlled enough drug sales to draw attention from people who expected obedience. At that time, one of the most feared criminal organizations in British Columbia was the Red Scorpions. They dominated large portions of the lower mainland drug trade through intimidation, strict control, and brutal enforcement. Anyone selling drugs in areas they claimed was expected to pay a fee, often called a tax, in exchange for being allowed to operate. Refusal was seen as open defiance. Corey Lal was approached with a demand from the Red Scorpions to pay a large sum of money so he could continue selling drugs. The message was clear and deliberate. Paying meant survival. Refusing meant consequences. Lal chose not to comply. His decision was viewed as a challenge to the Red Scorpions' authority, something the gang's leadership could not ignore without appearing weak to rivals and associates. The situation escalated further when Lal attempted to expand his operation instead of backing down. This move sent a signal that he believed he could operate outside the control of the dominant gang. In the criminal world, this kind of defiance often ends only one way. For the Red Scorpions, allowing Lal to continue would undermine their grip on power across the region. Behind closed doors, plans were discussed and approved. The goal was not just punishment, but total elimination. The message needed to be unmistakable. This was not about a simple warning or confrontation. It was about demonstrating control through extreme violence, ensuring no one else would consider refusing demands in the future. As these decisions were being made, everyday life continued inside the Balmoral Tower. The people living there had no knowledge of the threat forming beyond their walls. The apartment that would soon become the center of the massacre was already marked as a target, even though innocent lives surrounded it on all sides. By the time the plan was finalized, there was no turning back. The people sent to carry it out were prepared to do whatever was necessary. In the next part, the focus shifts to how that plan was put into motion and how multiple people were unknowingly drawn into a situation they could not escape. On the afternoon of October 19th, 2007, the plan that had been quietly set into motion finally reached the Balmoral Tower in Surrey. The building was busy in the way apartment towers usually are during the day, with the residents coming and going and no visible sign that anything was wrong. Inside one unit on the 15th floor, Corey Lal and several people connected to him were present, unaware that they were being watched and tracked. A man named Sofon CK played a critical role in what happened next. He was not a resident of the building, but he knew both the target and the people planning the attack. SEK was used to gain access to the apartment and ensure the door would open without resistance. His involvement allowed the situation to move from planning into action without drawing immediate attention. Once inside the unit, the attackers took control of everyone already there. the atmosphere inside the apartment shifted instantly from routine to terror. The people inside were restrained and forced to wait, though they had no way of knowing why time was being stretched out or what was coming next. The delay was intentional, as the attackers were waiting for one more person connected to the target. During this period, Ed Schellenberg arrived to do scheduled repair work in the apartment. He was a gas fitter, carrying out a normal job, completely unaware of what had already taken place inside. His arrival placed an innocent worker directly into the center of a violent crime through nothing more than bad timing. Across the hallway, Christopher Mohan stepped out of his own apartment. He lived there with his mother and was preparing to leave for the day. When his door opened, he was confronted and pulled into the neighboring unit. In a matter of seconds, another innocent person became trapped in a situation he had no connection to and no control over. Not long after, Edward Narong arrived at the apartment. His presence marked the final step in the plan. With everyone the attackers intended now inside the unit, the situation shifted again. What had been a controlled holding phase was about to become something far worse. As the door closed behind the last arrival, the attackers moved quickly to finish what they came to do. The events that followed would leave 6 people dead and turn an ordinary apartment into the scene of one of the most shocking crimes in Canadian history. In the next part, the focus turns to how the massacre was discovered and how police were first alerted to what had happened. The massacre remained hidden for hours inside the 15th floor apartment, unnoticed by other residents going about their day. What finally raised concern had nothing to do with noise or visible violence. Outside the building, Ed Schellenberg's work vehicle was still parked where it should not have been. By late afternoon, this stood out as unusual for a job that should have been completed much earlier. The building manager decided to check on the situation. When he approached the unit, the door was partially open. Inside, he saw Schellenberg lying motionless. Fearing a possible gas leak, he did not go further into the apartment. Instead, he pulled the building's fire alarm, forcing residents to evacuate and bringing emergency responders to the scene. When police entered the unit, they quickly realized the scale of what they were dealing with. 6 men were found dead inside the apartment. The scene immediately stood apart from typical gang-related shootings due to the number of victims and the presence of 2 people with no criminal ties. The 15th floor was sealed off as a major crime scene, and the building became the center of intense police activity. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched one of the largest homicide investigations in British Columbia history. Officers canvassed the building, collected surveillance footage, and began identifying everyone who had entered or exited the tower that day. Roads around the area were blocked off as forensic teams worked late into the night. As details emerged, investigators confirmed that the apartment had been used as a drug stash location, pointing to an organized crime motive rather than a random act of violence. This immediately raised concerns that the killings were part of a larger gang conflict unfolding in the Lower Mainland. Police also made it clear that the deaths of Schellenberg and Mohan were being treated as deeply significant, highlighting the danger of gang violence spilling into everyday spaces. News of the massacre spread quickly across Canada. The idea that 6 people could be killed in a residential high-rise in the middle of the day shook the public and drew national attention. Pressure mounted on police to identify those responsible and explain how such an extreme crime could happen without warning. Behind the scenes, investigators were already tracing connections between known gang members, phone records, and past disputes. What they were uncovering pointed toward a carefully planned hit, rather than a spontaneous act. In the next part, the focus shifts to how police unraveled the conspiracy and the long, complicated road toward arrests and accountability. As the investigation continued, police slowly built a case around the people believed to have planned and carried out the killings. The breakthrough came when an insider connected to the crime agreed to cooperate with authorities. This individual provided crucial details about how the attack was organized, who was involved, and why the apartment had been targeted. Their cooperation came at great personal risk and underscored just how dangerous the world surrounding the case truly was. Eventually, 2 men, Cody Havisher and Matthew Johnston, were charged and brought to trial. In the year 2014, both were found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years, reflecting the scale and severity of the crime. The convictions marked a major moment for investigators who had spent years piecing together evidence from a tangled web of gang alliances in silence. The legal process, however, was far from straightforward. During the court proceedings, serious issues involving police misconduct were revealed. Several officers connected to the investigation were accused of inappropriate relationships with witnesses, damaging the credibility of parts of the case. These revelations complicated the prosecution and cast a long shadow over the investigation, raising difficult questions about trust, ethics, and accountability within law enforcement. Attention also turned to the man believed to have ordered the killings, Red Scorpion's leader Jamie Bacon. Charges against him faced delays and legal challenges for years. In the year 2017, a judge stayed the first-degree murder charge due to concerns about the integrity of the investigation. Later, Bacon pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and received a significantly reduced sentence compared to those who carried out the attack. For many, especially the victims' families, this outcome felt deeply unsatisfying. The Surrey Six Massacre left a permanent mark on Surrey and on Canada as a whole. It exposed how organized crime could reach into ordinary residential spaces and how innocent people could be caught in the middle without warning. The deaths of Ed Schellenberg and Christopher Mohan became symbols of that harsh reality, showing that gang violence does not stay contained within the criminal world. Years later, the case is still remembered as one of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian history. It changed how police approach organized crime investigations and sparked public debate about justice, policing, and the protection of innocent lives. The story of the Surrey Six stands as a grim reminder that behind every headline are families forever changed and a community left asking how such a tragedy was allowed to happen. Robert William Pickton was born on October 24th, 1949, in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. He grew up on a pig farm just outside Vancouver, a place far from the city's busy streets. But life on the farm was far from peaceful. The Pickton family farm was described by neighbors as dirty and poorly kept, with animals wandering freely inside the house. Robert and his younger brother, David, had a difficult childhood. They were often bullied at school because of their messy appearance and the strong farm smell that followed them everywhere. Robert struggled in school and was placed in special education classes after failing 2nd grade. He had a close, if complicated, relationship with his mother, but reportedly a troubled and distant connection with his father. One story that sticks out is from when Robert was about 12 years old. He raised a calf that he loved, but one day he came home to find it had been killed. This experience, combined with the neglectful environment, seemed to harden him and may have influenced how he viewed other living beings. After leaving school, Robert worked as a meat cutter apprentice for nearly 7 years. When his parents died in the late 1970s, he and his siblings inherited the family farm. Instead of leaving, Robert and his brother stayed and began hosting wild parties at the farm, which they called the Piggy Palace. These gatherings included various people from the local community, and the farm became known for its chaotic and lawless atmosphere. However, behind the scenes, Robert Pickton was hiding a dark and terrible secret that would later shock all of Canada. During the 1990s, the downtown east side of Vancouver became the center of growing concern. This neighborhood faced severe poverty, addiction, and homelessness. Many women living and working there were vulnerable, and they began to vanish without explanation. These women were often Indigenous and marginalized, making them especially at risk and frequently overlooked by society and law enforcement. Between the mid-1990s and early 2000s, numerous women disappeared from this area. Families reported them missing, but their cases did not receive the attention they deserved. Police often viewed these women through a lens of suspicion due to their involvement in drug use or work on the street, leading to delayed or minimal investigation. This lack of urgency allowed the disappearances to continue without immediate action. Meanwhile, Robert Pickton was exploiting this vulnerability. He used promises of money, drugs, and shelter to lure women to his farm in Port Coquitlam. What happened once they arrived was horrific. Over time, evidence would show that many women never left his property alive, turning the farm into a place of unimaginable tragedy. The growing number of missing women was a silent alarm that something terrible was happening, but the full story was still hidden from the public eye. Despite the growing number of missing women, police efforts to stop Robert Pickton were plagued by serious problems. One of the earliest missed chances came in March of 1997. A woman escaped from Pickton's farm, badly injured and terrified, and told police he had attacked her. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder and other offenses. But surprisingly, the charges were dropped in 1998 because prosecutors believed the victim's addiction issues made her unreliable. This decision had tragic consequences. After the charges were dropped, many more women went missing. Police had evidence from that earlier case, including Pickton's clothing, with DNA from missing women, but it was not properly tested for years. Additionally, tips from informants about Pickton's suspicious activities were ignored or mishandled. A major problem was poor communication between two police forces, the Vancouver Police Department and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The farm was in the RCMP's area, but the missing women reports came to the Vancouver police. This lack of coordination delayed the investigation. Later, a public inquiry called Forsaken exposed the systemic failures and biases that allowed Pickton to continue. It revealed that many officers and officials dismissed the missing women's cases because of their background and lifestyle. This failure to take the disappearances seriously created a dangerous environment that allowed a serial killer to operate freely for years. The breakthrough in the Robert Pickton case came in early 2002, but it was not related to the missing women investigation. A former employee reported seeing illegal firearms in Pickton's trailer, which gave the Royal Canadian Mounted Police enough reason to obtain a search warrant for the farm. On February 5th, 2002, a joint task force from the Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP began searching the Port Coquitlam property. What they uncovered was horrifying. The farm was cluttered with old buildings, junk, and signs of long-term neglect. As they searched, police found personal belongings belonging to many missing women, including jewelry and clothing. Then human remains were discovered. This led to the largest forensic investigation in Canadian history, costing about $70 million. Specialists used heavy machinery and forensic technology to carefully examine the soil and buildings. In total, DNA from over 30 women was found on the property. Investigators also found severed body parts stored in containers and scattered remains across the farm. These discoveries confirmed the worst fears about Pickton's crimes and marked the beginning of his final legal battle. Robert Pickton was arrested on February 22nd, 2002, and initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Over time, these charges grew to 26 counts. During his time in custody, an undercover officer posed as an inmate and recorded Pickton confessing that he had killed 49 women. He even said he regretted not reaching 50 victims, admitting his capture was due to carelessness. The trial began in January 2007, focusing on 6 of the murder charges to ensure a strong case. These 6 victims represented only a portion of the women whose remains were found on the farm. On December 9th, 2007, Pickton was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, but was acquitted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years, the harshest sentence allowed under Canadian law at the time. The remaining charges were stayed in 2010, a decision that left some families frustrated, feeling justice was incomplete. However, the case sparked important national conversations about the treatment of missing and murdered Indigenous women and the failures within law enforcement. Robert Pickton remained in prison until his death on May 31st, 2024, at the age of 74, after being assaulted by another inmate. His crimes and the failures that allowed them to continue serve as a powerful reminder of the need to protect society's most vulnerable members. The Pickton case changed Canada forever, shining a light on systemic issues that are still being addressed today.